Hello, tell me, have you ever searched on Google in the middle of the night about the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle? This guy wasted no time and went to see this mysterious place with his own eyes. He certainly wasn't prepared for what he was going to see. Lemuel Gulliver is a cool guy who loves basketball, Star Wars, and rock music. His room looks like that of a typical teenager, and even at work, he sometimes plays his favorite game, Guitar Hero. Speaking of work, Gulliver works at a trendy New York newspaper, not as a journalist, but as a postal service employee. One day, a new employee named Dan arrives at the office, clearly not intending to stay in this entry-level position for long. Gulliver, on the other hand, feels out of place in his job. He sees himself as a lowly worker and is afraid to approach the journalists, especially the beautiful Darcy, whom he has been in love with since the beginning. Dan teases Gulliver about his inability to make the first move and talk to the girl he likes. At the end of the day, Dan shocks Gulliver with news. The newcomer has been promoted on his first day and will now be in charge of the mail service. Smugly, he reminds Gulliver that he has been in the same position for 10 years and is not destined for career advancement. Dan's words shake Gulliver, and he leaves the office in a terrible mood late at night. As he heads towards the elevator, he notices that Darcy is still sitting in front of her computer. The young girl notices her colleague, and they start a conversation. Gulliver almost decides to invite her out, but he starts to panic and pretends that this isn't why he came. Going from one lie to another, Gulliver struggles to get out of this situation and claims that he constantly writes articles as a journalist without showing them to anyone. He adds that he travels a lot to places like Mexico and New Zealand, for example. Darcy is pleasantly surprised and asks him to bring some of his writings to her. The next morning, Gulliver spends the entire evening inventing a grand story about travels to different countries, but he can't go beyond the title. Finally, he has a stroke of genius and decides to gather fragments from different travel guides and websites. However, instead of immediately asking Gulliver out, Darcy makes an unexpected proposition. It turns out that she has had an important journalistic mission to fulfill for a long time, and she still hasn't found a volunteer. She needs to investigate the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. Once again, Gulliver doesn't even have time to object. He tells her a bunch of lies, explaining that he is an experienced sailor and that the prospect of spending 3 whole weeks at sea wouldn't bother him at all. Gulliver arrives in the Bermuda Triangle and is given a boat and a map with coordinates. During the first few hours of the adventure, he reads magazines about robots and enjoys life. But soon, after a short nap, he wakes up and realizes that he is caught in a terrible storm. His boat is near a giant water tornado. Before Gulliver can realize what's happening, his boat is sucked into the terrifying vortex. He loses consciousness, and when he wakes up, he realizes that he can't move. Something is crawling on him, and it's not insects but strange little men in military uniforms. Gulliver learns that he has ended up in a place called Lilliput and is now accused of aiding and abetting certain enemies. He realizes that he must run before it's too late. He easily breaks all the ropes tying him to the ground and attempts to escape, but he has no chance. The inhabitants of Lilliput may be small, but they are quick-witted. They bring the giant down again and make him traverse the city to take him directly to the palace of King Theodore. Princess Mari tells her father that it is inhumane to treat a guest in this way. She asks if the giant can be released from his restraints. However, her fiancé, General Edward, strongly opposes it. He is convinced that Gulliver is a spy from the enemy kingdom of Blefuscu and demands that he be detained. Gulliver is thrown into a dungeon where he meets Horatio, a Lilliputian imprisoned for expressing his love for Princess Mari. Gulliver can't believe that one can be sent to prison for such a thing. Horatio explains to him that such a thing is not allowed for men of their class unless they commit an incredibly valorous act. The conversation between the unfortunate friends is interrupted by General Edward. Gulliver tries to win his favor and asks him to loosen the restraints, but he refuses. Instead, he saddles the giant and makes him plow the fields. Meanwhile, the army of Blefuscu is at the gates and takes advantage of the temporary absence of the general to infiltrate the kingdom. The invaders' plan is simple: set fire to the royal family's castle and kidnap Mari. General Edward rushes to the aid of his beloved, but he is quickly captured by enemy soldiers. For Gulliver, It is easy to save the princess by simply reaching out to her balcony. However, saving the princess is not enough. The king is still inside the now-burning palace. Gulliver manages to break a window, but there is no way to physically get the small people out. There simply isn't enough water to extinguish a fire of that magnitude. Gulliver desperately searches for a solution and then has a brilliant idea. He takes off his pants and urinates on the building to put out the flames. The crowd pays homage to the hero, and the monarch, Theodore, invites him to a notary. Gulliver accepts, but with one condition: to free Horatio from detention and invite him to the celebration as well. Throughout the evening, the friends relax in the royal chambers. Horatio gets closer to Princess Marie, and Gulliver becomes the center of attention of the assembly. He tells his guests about where he comes from, but as is often the case with Gulliver, the conversation is filled with lies. The people present quickly come to believe that Manhattan is a sort of mega-monarchy with Gulliver as the lord. Over the next 7 days, the inhabitants of Lilliput manage to build a human-sized house for Gulliver. They even set up a theater where he performs scenes from Star Wars, Titanic, and Avatar. Gulliver captivates the king and other spectators by claiming that these stories are from his own life. Everyone admires the new idol, except for Edward, who remains extremely skeptical. Horatio is doing well, and his new friend gives him dating advice. He sings an original song for his beloved, and it seems that the princess is charmed by him, gradually losing interest in General Edward. Soon, Gulliver's boat is found, albeit broken. The subjects of King Theodore promise to repair it quickly. The giant is overjoyed, especially when they find a phone on the boat with many voicemail messages from his dear Darcy. Gulliver expects to hear words of love from the young girl, but she says, "I can't believe you lied to me." During Gulliver's absence, Darcy had the time to examine his article closely and discovered that it was entirely copied from guides and internet articles. Now, the journalist will have to carry out the writing mission herself and never wants to see Gulliver again. The giant's enthusiasm disappears immediately. He sits alone and sad in the evening when he is suddenly approached by Princess Marie. She senses that Gulliver is upset because of the princess waiting for him in a distant kingdom. Suddenly, Marie confesses that she is also troubled by matters of the heart. She has fallen in love with Horatio. Gulliver uplifts her spirits and tells her that she must follow the call of her heart. He also asks the king to allow him to stay a little longer. When Edward learns that the giant is not in a hurry to leave, he becomes furious. The king does not appreciate his insolence and decides to appoint Gulliver as a general, making Edward the deputy general. The latter is so humiliated that he becomes mad and decides to seek revenge. Edward lowers the defenses protecting the Lilliputian coast from invaders, and the soldiers of Blefuscu immediately take advantage of the situation. Gulliver is now the only hope for the inhabitants of Lilliput, as he is the only one who can stop the invading fleet. Gulliver does not give up in the face of the difficult task. He bravely enters the water and begins to negotiate with the enemy. The giant admits that he doesn't want to kill anyone and proposes to the sailors of the kingdom of Blefuscu to play along and leave. However, the invaders do not appreciate the general's mercy. Of course, Gulliver is not in danger with cannons of that size. He quickly recovers from the gunfire, and with a burst of frenzy, he eliminates the entire enemy fleet with a single swipe of his hand. He is welcomed as a hero, and Edward's plan fails. The princess also rejects the general and declares her intention to break off the engagement with him. Edward is furious and has no more options for revenge. He decides to take an extreme measure: a visit to the neighboring enemy state. The deputy general then informs the local king that Gulliver has transformed Lilliput into a replica of the distant and repugnant Manhattan. If they do not act, the same fate will soon befall their kingdom. Edward proposes a plan he devised from the robotics manual found on Gulliver's boat. Soon, mysterious 5 strikes echo in the main square of Lilliput, and the crowd disperses in a panic. Horatio tells Gulliver that something terrible is about to happen, and the giant sees a strange robot controlled by Edward standing before him. The king realizes that the servant has betrayed him and that only Gulliver can save the monarchy. The giant is then faced with a decisive battle in which he easily agrees to get involved, although he has no idea what awaits him next. Gulliver tries to move his opponent, but fails. Edward, on the other hand, easily lifts the giant off the ground and demands his surrender. Gulliver immediately pleads for mercy, and the inhabitants can't believe their ears. He is the president of another country and the bravest man in the world. But this time, Gulliver is not joking or lying. He admits that he has always lied to the Lilliputians. After this humiliating defeat, Edward orders Gulliver to be tied to a raft and sent to a nearby island. The giant has heard that it is dangerous, but when he arrives, it seems relatively calm. However, not for long. Worried, Horatio suggests to the princess that they flee the kingdom together before it's too late. Marie, however, is disappointed in him. In a fit of anger, she declares that all of Horatio's and Gulliver's words are lies. Meanwhile, the rest of the Lilliputians have to worry about another unexpected visitor. Darcy, who went to Bermuda to investigate, arrives on the shore. Gulliver wakes up and realizes that this time he is in a land of giants. He is now the puppet of a giant girl who torments him all day and does not give him any respite. However, he won't suffer for long because Horatio comes to his rescue. He asks the giant to return and save Lilliput. Gulliver resists, even though he has heard about Darcy's arrival. Horatio then reminds him of all his past exploits, and the giant finally agrees. Once in Lilliput, the first thing Gulliver does is go to the dungeon where Darcy is received alongside the king and queen. The princess asks why everyone here calls her Princess Gulliver, and for the first time in his life, Gulliver decides to answer this rather embarrassing question honestly. Darcy is touched, but there is no time for sentiments. She says it's time to flee. Gulliver stops her, as he has already let down the people of Lilliput once and has no intention of doing it again. The giant heads to the main square for a decisive duel with Edward. At first, things don't go so bad, but quickly the cunning general deploys his secret weapon, a paralyzing pistol. With this advantage up his sleeve, Gulliver has little chance. However, Horatio comes to his aid in time. He infiltrates the robot's suit and cuts the wires. Now it's easy to defeat Edward, and Gulliver wastes no time. The inhabitants of Lilliput rejoice. The giant is a new hero, just like his friend Horatio, who is not only forgiven by Princess Marie but also blessed by the king himself to marry the princess. Gulliver is also doing well. Darcy kisses him and goes back with him to Manhattan. They now work together and write travel articles, just like in the wildest dreams of the once ordinary man.